Sun's always got some energy in the afternoon. One of my goals for this presentation is to hopefully make sure that no one falls asleep.
Yes.
It's a tall order for a tall dude. And there are taller dudes out there. That's right, stand-up comedian goodness. But seriously though, so who's procrastinated before?
Oh. Can I raise 2 hands?
Oh, go ahead and raise both hands if you want
That's
to.
right.
Go ahead and raise both hands if you want to.
Procrastinator.
Looks like I'm in the right place and you're at the right place because myself, I've procrastinated before. Folks have been telling me for years I got this radio voice, I should be in radio. 2012, 2014, I got this idea. I should do a podcast.
Oh.
Yes. Yes. And 2016 comes around. No podcast.
Oh.
But we do have a visitor, Francis, random on file for you.
Yeah, whoa, there you go.
That's right. Indeed. Let's welcome the past trio members.
Oh, yeah.
You're the fun one today. And you get some swag too.
I get some swag.
Oh,
And of course, Tony Whitten as well. We appreciate you.
Far too kind. Thank you.
Yes, indeed.
That's right.
But yes, 2016, no podcast, but I published my first entry into the business of immortality known as Going North, Tips and Techniques to Advance Yourself. And it was a victory for me because it's one of the greatest things in the world is to be able to take up the challenge, publish your work, and the thing about publishing your work is you gotta sell the thing. Did well with a few book signings. However, this was both a time of light and darkness, a blessing and a curse. Blessing is the book is out. Curse is my father, he was on his last few months of being alive on this planet because he had dementia. It was October 2016 when this book came out. My father passed away March 2017. And I was going through a period of grief. I stopped the book marketing and came around to June. No book sales, so I figured, let's go back around and start that podcast. And funny enough, I was going to call my podcast the Mr. Music and Reads podcast, reviewing books and just sharing music from independent musicians I like. And funny enough, a friend of mine in the coaching business, we had coffee one day and she was like, why don't you call it the Going North podcast? Because you have this brand here of going north, of advancement, why don't you keep that? And I was like, you know what, you're right. And it's always good to have someone in your corner that can give you some great advice and some direction. Because no matter how good we are alone, we are better together. Not butter together. Oh yeah, slapping all the knees, yes indeed. You didn't see that one coming, did you?
There's a bee's knees.
Oh, yes, indeed. I don't have a bee in here, so you're lucky. But seriously though, it was June of that year, and then I had this idea of starting a podcast, the Going North podcast. I was going to interview authors all over, well actually, it became all over the world later. The name of the game was to interview self-published authors to give them a platform to share their stories and to keep themselves in the minds of their readership. Because when I had my first ever interview promoting my book, I kept getting cut off by the person who was interviewing. And then, when I filed for my second interview, which is an actual podcast interview, I realized this is something totally different because a podcast was different from an online radio show because the lady, she was expecting me to talk more. She wasn't cutting me off because I kept my phrases short. I'm like, all right, I'm going to get cut off anyway if this hour's going to be done. And she was expecting more. I'm like, oh, darn. So you know what? I'm going to make sure that experience doesn't happen for someone else, at least when they come through me. And then lo and behold, I had this idea. And this is going to be the first key for the 5 keys for explosive growth. And it's called curiosity. Curiosity. Those who want to grow are those who are curious. Those who are curious are the ones who continue to grow because they are questioning not only the things around them, but how they can become better. I wanted to know how the heck you start a podcast. I thought you had to run around the darn country of the world with a microphone in your hand looking like a pizza boy. But after that interview with the lady who wasn't cutting me off, I realized, you know what? It's not required to do that. We did it through something called Uber conference call. And I was like, really? And come from my own home? Really? I have to run around like a pizza boy and actually have to come around occasionally with a pizza as a bribe? It's like, hey, can I get some of your time, please? It'll be great. There won't be dad jokes. Okay, there will be dad jokes, but... And that was the thing, curiosity. Out of curiosity, what is a podcast? What do you think a podcast is? Anyone?
A small interview.
Small interview. Anyone else? Matt?
Interviewing someone and getting motivation from what they gotta say and taking it in.
That's right, drink it in, man. Any other guesses? Sunil?
It's an informational, sharing audio, business, technology, interview, stories.
That's good. We had another one.
Online talk show.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
All good answers. All good answers, if not great answers. Oh, yes, Paulette.
Something you can listen to on the go.
That's right, on the go. On the go indeed. Especially when you're going north. Yes, indeed. Swung it right out the park with that one. Always go for the low-hanging fruit, as they say. All great answers. And until that time, I defined a podcast until September 2017 as a lazy man's radio station. And let me tell you, that is a darn bold-faced lie I've been telling folks, because it is sure not a lazy man's radio station. Because that's a lot of work because I'm a one-man wrecking crew here. And I only have so much energy to contribute to 168 hours in a week. Because I still got to sleep, right? I still got to raise my hand when I wake up, right? Okay, maybe not that. Maybe just do the Undertaker sit-up. But definitely curiosity. A podcast is all of those things because it's a way to share with others. Share stories, information, knowledge, and expertise. And it's always good to share your expertise. Very good to share your expertise, especially when you have a book. Because we have authors in the room. So if you're an author, go ahead and stand on up. All right, oh, pass around these papers. Go ahead and shoot your name. Tell us your name. What's the name of your book? Yep, start with you, Mona.
Okay, I didn't write the book. I wrote scientific papers. So I'm an author on scientific journals. Oh yes, I wrote a chapter in a book about HIV. So I consider myself an author.
And one of our wonderful presenters in the back, Michelle Chenoweth.
I've written 4 novels. My latest one just came out last month called The Jealous Son. I write contemporary suspense, a little romance novels based on Bible stories. So The Faithful One, The Peacemaker, The Runaway Prophet, and The Jealous Son. Thank you.
I'm excited about this one. You, Adrian.
Why did you say that? Don't be excited. Hi, I'm Adrienne Dillard, and my book is called Every Day is Grandparents' Day. It's how to decrease your grandchildren's screen time. And it gives you activities that you can use interacting with. And actually, it works for anyone because I've had babysitters use it. And it gives you activities to do with your children, grandchildren, children that you're babysitting. And it's also got little stories for each activity.
And of course, another lady who's pretty in purple.
Good afternoon, I guess, Dr. Elizabeth Carter. My book is called Gaining Access to Lead Yourself. And ACCESS is an acronym for Activities Critical for Continuous Evolution and Success for Self. I share tips and tools on how you can better lead yourself, because you can't lead others until you have yourself together. It includes at each chapter some reflection questions on your life, and it has a workbook for you to start to make notes around goals on how you can improve your life in the particular sections. And it is outside because I am here selling it.
Give it up for our fabulous ladies with pins, that's right. But yes, curiosity. The next key is commitment. Key number 2 is commitment. Because it's one thing to be curious about something, find out what it is, and then have to take action on that one thing. I wanted to start a podcast, I figured a way to do it. And I decided to do a launch called the 50 Days of Inspiration. 50 whole days of inspiration. 50 quotes each day, tried to recruit a couple other folks on Facebook to share with their favorite quote. And the problem was, this was probably around July 2017. And the plan was on day 50, it was going to be the announcement/launch of the Going North podcast. Problem was, 47 days passed and I forgot 3 other images and still no podcast. So there's that procrastination thing again. And then I realized, all right, that failed. But I was able to connect with a fellow Toastmaster, connected me with other authors I never would have had access to in the beginning. Did recorded interviews with them. And then, finally, September 14th, the Going North podcast was launched with 6 interviews on day 1. So it still happened because I put myself on the line to actually make sure I got it out there. Not to mention, folks are going to ask you when their episode is going to go live. Some are going to wait very patiently. Some will be like, hey, you said this date, when's it coming out? It's like, oh, yeah. Yeah, I know it said September 6th, but that was kind of a birthday, so it's like, yeah, okay. It's going to be on September the 14th instead. Because not only did I miss my whole launch theory, or at least my launch plan, but I still didn't have any idea how to fully launch one because I didn't know what the heck an RSS feed was. All I knew how to do was upload stuff to SoundCloud. I had to start with SoundCloud and then move over to iTunes 2 weeks later. And that led to a launch of 8 episodes that day because every Thursday, and now Mondays too, a different author has an interview that goes live. So even though I was late, I still finished. Even though it may be midnight somewhere and it may be Friday on the East Coast, it's still Thursday somewhere else. Better late than never, as they say. After the commitment, then comes consistency. When you start a podcast, you have to be consistent. Set yourself up for success. I did a halfway job of setting myself up for success, but I still set myself up for it because I had, and it's a good 10 interviews in a backlog, 6 launched on SoundCloud. 2 weeks later, I figured out what the heck to do, and then 8 episodes launched on iTunes that one day. And then it's been an author every week, once a week on Thursday for a certain amount of time. And around episode 32, it was around March of 2018, last year, I get this email from a PR person from Interview Connections, which is a company that connects folks who want to get on podcasts with podcast hosts. And when I saw the guest person's name, who wanted to be interviewed on the Going North podcast, it was a guy by the name of Damian Lupo, this millionaire black belt martial artist. And not only is he a black belt martial artist, he created his own hybrid of martial arts style known as Yogi-Do, combining the Japanese art of Aikido with yoga. So I was ecstatic and full of gratitude. I get to interview a millionaire black belt martial arts master? I like martial arts. One day I intend to be a millionaire. He's got a book, I got a book. This is a match made in heaven. No. But seriously though, and then a couple days later I get another email from another PR person out in Boston, interview this guy by the name of Charlie Harari. There's George Schiller, who became a podcast host of his own, and he actually became a New York Times bestselling author with his book Unlocking Greatness. I had him on my show later. And then I get all these queries from all over the darn country and all over the world. And I'm like, where do all these people come from? And then one day after an interview happened, I asked a guy out in New Mexico, I was like, all right, how the heck did you find out about me? I'm just a random black guy from Baltimore. How the heck did you And he told me that I was on a list of podcasters in the top 670 podcasts in the world in different categories. And in the top 10 of self-help, I was listed alongside Brendan Bouchard, Lewis Howes, and Gretchen Rubin. These folks got platforms 10x the size of me. I'm a one-man wrecking crew. These folks got teams. Some got 10x talks, millions of downloads. Brendan Bouchard, he's a millionaire who's got all these books and whatnot. I'm just alongside these folks? How the heck did this happen? And it made so much sense, and it's all because of commitment. And it's all because of consistency. It's one thing to be great, but you gotta be great over time. You have to get greater over time. Ask yourself, how can I become greater over time? What can I do today to make tomorrow my masterpiece? What can I do today to make right now my masterpiece? Each and every single one of you in your chairs right now, you decided to invest in yourself to be here today and to be in this room with the guys known for bad puns, to learn something. And those were the three major keys that helped me to realize, you know what, explosive growth is possible. Being curious, being committed, being consistent. But now comes the care piece. That's key number 4, care. Rashad Mills eloquently stated earlier about talking about self-care and taking out our trash. Because it stinks after a while. And care is very important. Because summer 2018, July, I went to a bi-weekly show, Mondays and Thursdays. I was doing great. Kept going, everything was great. But self-care is also something that I have to keep in mind too, because it takes, depending on the episode, it could take from half an hour to maybe 3 hours, depending. And I had to make sure I kept myself in mind to actually be able to keep cranking out this work. The interview piece is fine, but the back work, that's a whole nother story. So earlier this summer, I actually made sure that I interviewed a bunch of other people and had a backlog of interviews ready to go. So that way I can enjoy my 2-week vacation. So make sure you set aside time for yourself in your journey of personal growth. To keep going. And go. And go. And go. And wake your neighbor up if they're asleep. Not only care, community. Good things are done alone, great things are done with teams. And I consider every interview guest that I've had on my show, every guest I've interviewed, part of the team of mutual success building. I've had the good Dr. Elizabeth Carter on the show, looking to get Adrian on the show in the future, of course, the wonderful Michelle, and many others, because there's at least 5 more authors in this room waiting to release their book and to get out there in the world and create your own version of success. And that happens with community. And those are the 5 magical keys for explosive growth. Now you have all these handouts in front of you. Did anyone not get a handout or a wristband by any chance? Oh yeah, Francis, how can I forget the fabulous Francis? There's a handout for you. This is Q&A time. Go ahead and ask away. Sunil, you have a question? Dr. Carter.
What's the easiest technology to start with when you want to get started with a podcast?
Yep, so that's listed in the packet on page 3, I believe. And that's if you're doing interview-based. If you're doing interview-based, it's basically good to use this online software called Zoom. And yep, it is a lot better than Zoom. It's a lot better than freeconferencecall.com, because I used to use that in the beginning because another podcast host recommended that to me. But after a while, the audio got choppy at times, and there was no way to really test it. As opposed to Zoom, where things got more clear, especially when it came back to the community piece, when someone from a couple weeks ago was like, wow, the show upped its game in quality. What did you do? I'm like, just use Zoom, and my guest, her husband, is a vocal artist, so it was definitely going to be a great episode. So Zoom, that's a great way to start, as well as with the Blue Snowball microphone. That's listed in there. And the good thing is, with a podcast, it's so easy to start. The barrier to entry is low, because you can do it all for under $200 just to start off. So get yourself a good microphone if you already have a computer that works. And also, I should have listed get a hard drive as well to store all of your files and back them up, because that's also another thing too when you're doing something like this, to back up what you do. Think about the times when you may have had that college paper or that paper, and then you were about to type in the last paragraph and it all got deleted out of a power outage. So always save your work. Yes.
Can I ask 2 questions?
Sure.
And thank you so much for your talk, and thank you for this wonderful practical information you've given us. And I know the answers are probably in here somewhere, but I wanted to know, since podcasts, I mean, it seems like so many people have podcasts.
Right.
How do you break in, you know, in a market that's getting saturated? Like, how do you even know where to, you know, what to talk about? Because there's so many things you could talk about.
Right.
And then the other question is, once you figure that out, how do you get the word out if you're not like a social media person? You need to become that, I'm sure.
Well, that helps a lot, especially if you're an introvert like myself, believe it or not. But yeah, so podcasting this is probably one of the greatest times to start a podcast, because a lot of folks are starting their own. However, what's going to set you apart is if you keep with it, the consistency piece. Those who are consistent are those who are going to get noticed and known. Because right now I'm 200 episodes in, but I've only been up for 2 years. If I did a 1 week show, probably would have been like maybe 105. So consistency is what's going to set you apart, because a lot of folks start these podcasts thinking, all right, it's episode 6, I'm going to make all this money, I'm going to get all this sponsorship, and I'm going to eventually hire a team to do all this work for me, I'm going to be a celebrity, and it doesn't happen that way. I still don't know how the heck I got on that self-help list. I say it was consistency and promotion, but they're probably, the guy just liked the show, just liked the interview. So that's one way to set your apart, is consistency. When you start, just keep going with it. And also, you can even go guerrilla marketing style. So if there's it may not be in the social media, but if you want to do like blog sites like reddit.com, and if it's like a topic that'll fit with what you're talking about, that's one way to do it. In the back of your packets, I put a poster advertising my podcast. So I get basically really no money up front for posting and just letting folks know about podcasts. You can go to your Starbucks or Panera Bread, go old school, hang a flyer on the community board. That's one way of doing it. Don't put in people's car windshields, because I personally hate that. I don't even look at your flyer that's on my car. I just grab it, rip it apart, and throw it in the trash without looking at it, because that just angers me. So, yes. So don't put it on someone's windshield, put it on a community board. And tell all your friends, ask them to leave reviews as well on iTunes as well. You can even show them how to leave reviews, or heck, even eventually getting the podcast on YouTube as well, and telling friends and family. That's another thing too. Friends and family are great. It's great to have great folks network, but some of your best supporters are going to be those who are not in your immediate circle of influence. Because one guy I worked with, we were getting along great and everything. It's like, hey, can you share a podcast? I haven't seen him share nothing since. And we worked together for like 3 years, and we were getting along great. He was like 1 year older than me, like big brother, little brother sort of thing, and it's like, all right, cool. And then some random person out of nowhere on social media land just shares stuff like crazy. So that's another thing to keep in mind. So just tell friends, family, post flyers, heck, even business cards. For those who might not have seen the Going North table yet with all the books, be sure to buy 10 copies of the book when you walk past the table. I'm also an author, so I go to vending events. And I keep my podcast on the back of my business card with my face on the front, so that way they remember who gave them this card, as well as to go check out this podcast. And I put YouTube and iTunes, since those are the 2 platforms that folks are most aware about. So just network every day. Have your metaphorical sword out every day, because networking is a 24/7 thing. Someone's sending you a friend request on Facebook or LinkedIn from Australia probably right now. And that was an extended answer to your question. Next question.
So, I mean, obviously you have now good circle, and you, as you said, you got in those top 10 centers, and you also know a lot of expert writers.
Yeah.
how do you study and when you're answering, asking questions, how do you study and what kind of formula do you use?
Cool. So for those who I already know in the network, like Dr. Carter, her book was nice, small and short, it was easy to read. And we get along great already, so that was an easy interview. But if it's someone I don't know, I usually dedicate 2 to 3 hours listening to whatever past interviews they've had, or downloading their ebook for free off of Amazon Kindle Unlimited with their unlimited program if they have an ebook version. And just checking out the social media profiles as well. So I usually dedicate a good 2 to 3 hours. And sometimes end up buying the guest book afterwards because it's so darn good. I'm like, all right, shoot, I'll buy a book afterwards too, support you. So yes, that's my usual method for guests and studying.
So when you ask questions, how do you, is there a template or do you kind of, it's a flow?
It's a conversational style podcast at this point because when I started, I had a great outline of questions, like the classic "Tell me about yourself." That's basically free reign for the person to basically tell us a bit about themselves. I'll read the bio, give an introduction, but there may be something that they're trying to promote right now immediately, and they may not have updated their bio recently, and that's their chance to enter in something, and then the conversation goes from here to there. So most of it's usually just from me going off of a Word document, and I just usually highlight certain points I take from books and everything like that, and then just ask questions based off of that, and also going off the actual study and those 2 questions. Heck, even one question every guest will get is what advice you would give to your 25-year-old self if you were in the current year 2019. That's probably the only real hard and fast rule for it. Hard, fast question I usually ask every guest, so that's basically that. And I believe Adrian had a question.
I did, actually, I thought I had 2, but I remember one. Do you suggest that we have like a bank of several recordings before we put our podcast out there?
Yes. Yes, indeed, because when, you never know what could happen. Just being honest, you never know what can happen because that's when I started. So basically based off of your schedule. So my show was going to be a weekly show, and I had at least 4 recorded interviews on my hard drive ready to go on top of my 6-episode launch. And that's something that a lot of folks recommend. When you launch a podcast, don't just launch 1 episode and then be done with it. Because most folks who find podcasts, they want to just binge listen. So if you have more than 1 to get to sample your style and then subscribe and keep on going with your content. So definitely batch.
All right. And I do remember the second question.
Beautiful.
How long does the editing take for a typical podcast? Think initially, not now. You're probably really good at it now.
He is really good at it.
Yeah.
In the beginning, my God. Yeah, so for the first few episodes, except for episode 1, I had to actually outsource the editing to someone else on Fiverr.com. And you can write that down. I didn't put that in the notes, actually. Fiverr.com, so that's Fiverr. And that's a great site for not only freelance podcast editors, but just about anything. I've had these 2 book covers done through Fiverr.com, so someone from some random strange country made these beautiful looking book covers on Fiverr.com. And you can find anything there too. You can actually find folks who will do a podcast intro for you too. But back to the original question though, the editing, it took hours in the beginning because I didn't know what the heck I was doing. And I was trying to use Audacity, which is a free audio editor. But because my laptop is Windows 8 and it's a Lenovo laptop that's really hardcore and stays awake, but the OS didn't communicate well with Audacity, I had to switch over to Adobe Audition, which is a lot smoother for me. So it used to take me at least a good, at least probably a good 2 to 3 hours in total, maybe 4. But now if I deeply focus on just editing, it can take at least a good 30 minutes.
All right, thank you.
I
What kind of editing do you do? You're just cutting out the guests' ums and ahs, or what do you actually?
Toastmaster says, curse my ears, because I hear every single I hear every single in the editing process, and it is That is the drawback to Toastmasters, because you get to hear every you know, so, double clutch. And I remember one guest, to protect the innocent, she had at least 50 ums. I stopped counting after 50. So that's most.
Really, once you add it out?
Yeah, so usually most of the ums that I catch, so ums as well as moments where there could be a motorcycle driving past. Because even though I keep it in a closed area where it's as soundproof as possible, folks like to just drive their darn motorcycle so darn loud up a freaking 20-mile-per-hour zone. I don't know why. So that, and just times where if something really didn't make too much sense, I cut that out too. Yeah, 2 questions. Let's start with the lady in green. I like mine.
You said Zoom, Z-O-O-M?
Yes, ma'am.
And what's the difference between that and the software on the iPhone?
Software on the app, there's actually no difference really, because you can actually install Zoom on your phone, if I'm not mistaken, your iPhone. Because I actually installed it on my Galaxy.
Okay.
So you can actually have Zoom on your phone. Funny enough, 90%, actually 95% of my interviews were done via headphones and my smartphone for a couple of years. Yes, indeed. Michelle.
I'm going to ask this question as an author.
Sure.
By the way, books for sale out there too.
There you go.
That's not why I'm asking the question, but I had to just say that. And a book coach that helps authors, first of all, it is a gold mine for anybody doing a podcast, because we want to get out there and get our books out there. So I'll go on any podcast pretty much. Having said that, I've been on some bad podcasts where the recording was lost and the podcast host said, well, not you, the podcast host said that this has never happened before. It was like struck by lightning. I don't know what happened. And I'm like, and I have a great social media following. Like I have 5,000 people and all these things, you know. Oh my gosh, like I can't, it's like it never happened. But here's the thing, like
Yes.
how they made it right was re-interviewed me. So there's like, you know, yes, you're new, yes, you're starting out. As an author though, so I've been invited to be on podcasts, and I've actually seen them on social media and asked to be on podcasts. How do we, as the author, find you? Let's just say I don't know you through Toastmasters.
Right.
How do I find you or somebody that will do a podcast on my books, fiction or modern day Bible stories, or my niche of my books? How do I find the right or any podcast host that wants to have me on as an author?
Funny enough, there's a website called podcastguestexperts.com. I believe that's listed somewhere in the workbook. Should be like page 4.
Yes.
Yep, podcast guest experts. So that is not only a Facebook group, but it's also a website as well, where you can actually, there's 2 options. So there's the paid option, which is $29 a month. And there's also the free option, $29 a month, lets you choose 2 different areas. So basically, Christian fiction will be one area, and let's see, book coaching, book
Okay.
writing. You can choose 2 separate areas, and then it basically gives you a 1 sheet of basically all the questions that folks can ask you. And it's worked well for me. I've secured about 10 interviews this year from that site alone, and I was able to actually make my money back from book sales after interviews. So that's a great place to go. That's a website, and they actually email it out to other folks. Heck, even radioguestlist.com. I'm pretty sure you're familiar with that. That one, yeah, it's okay for the free package.
I was gonna say you can do free and then.
Yeah,
Yeah,
usually,
great.
yeah. And also just looking at the,
That's radiohost.com, you said, right?
yeah, so there's podcast guest experts, and then there should be free radio guest
radio.
list.com. And they'll shoot you an email, I think like every other day, and then they show you 2 possible shows looking for guest authors on just about anything. And not only that, also just going on iTunes and then just looking for new and noteworthy under a certain genre. Funny enough, in the podcasting space, iTunes had about a good 30 different podcast genre areas. and now it's up to like 90, I believe, because they make it more diverse and makes it for more folks. Because we have so many folks starting podcasts, looking at the new and noteworthy section, because they haven't had, most likely, they haven't had too many folks notice them yet in terms of trying to have folks ask to get on the shows. So that's a good way to get on there. And plus, if they have at least a couple reviews, some people recommend getting on shows with 20 reviews. I'm like, folks, it's like book reviews. They drip in. So if you can find a show on new and noteworthy on iTunes, that's a good place to start. Listen to a few of their episodes, and then when you reach out to the folks, just let them know you liked a certain episode. One guy who actually asked to be on my show, he sent me an unlisted YouTube video listing the episodes that he watched and liked and the key takeaway he got from each episode. And that showed that he actually listened, because the episodes that he mentioned, that he listed, I wasn't listening to key takeaways at all back then. I listen a lot more stuff in the show notes now, so that showed that he actually cared and paid attention. So that's the way to do it.
And I have a follow-up question to what you're saying here.
Sure.
I saw you on, was it WJZ or Fox? Because I was on both, and
Yeah.
I saw you, and I was
Yeah.
like, wow, that's cool.
Yeah.
And I got that reaction when I was on TV,
Yeah.
and also on radio, and some national radio.
Yes.
But podcasts, I'm not getting the whole, wow, you were on a podcast. So I guess my question is, I know there's a benefit, all exposure is good, and all promotions and marketing is usually good,
Yeah.
except when they lose it and that type of thing.
Yeah.
But, you know, why podcasts? I guess I want to say, why should we want to be on podcasts when wouldn't our time be better spent going after the TV and radio? I guess I'm being devil's advocate, but.
It's all good. Except for the double part.
Angel's advocate. In other words, like, are more and more people listening to podcasts, do you think?
Yeah, more and more people are actually listening to podcasts, and funny enough, one guy I follow, his name is Zachary Babcock of this podcast called Underdog Empowerment. And he's actually had these big time authors like Robert Greene, who wrote 48 Laws of Power on his podcast, as well as a guy named Andy Frisella, who's also a millionaire, and all these other folks. So podcasts are there, it's just that it's just best to try to get on podcasts that are like mid-tier or just starting out, and then eventually building your way up and just having that social proof, because in a way it's kind of getting practice and showing and having social proof, like, hey, this person was on this podcast, and then when you get invited on a bigger show, then you'll have that proof, and then you'll have, I guess, the stage time in a way, because then you'll get to really deliver, and then you'll actually have some actual return on your time investment. So it's really just the fact of just getting those rounds in, that stage time in, because that's really what I've been using it for, because even though I prefer one-on-one in stage like this, podcasting is still a way to actually connect one-on-one with the person. And if someone hears your voice, like 5 months later, wouldn't it be worth it if they come back and be your client? Because that's one of the greatest things about podcasting. Yeah. All right, I believe Jay had his hand up after the show.
I did. Did you use Zoom specifically because you have an interview format?
Yes.
In other words, if two people are in the same room, would you still be recommending Zoom?
I say get 2 microphones and then record, like, make sure it's as soundproof as possible.
So what software would somebody do that type of thing?
For that, it should be Audacity, the computer can handle it, GarageBand, if an Apple user, and Adobe Audition can work with that as well. Yep. And I believe Mr. Tony Whitney.
How long are your podcasts? Is it longer now versus when you first started?
Yeah, I have to say it's longer now than when I first started, because I just basically went up to 5 questions and stuck to them for the most part, as opposed to letting all the conversations take their course. And that's still an advantage. The average episode for my podcast is 37 minutes. So it's a work commute time if you're going to DC and trying to not jump out the car, Paulette.
On the last page here, it says tune in every Monday and Thursday, and it has your from someone who knows nothing about podcasts.
Yes.
Is there a particular time you have to tune in?
Nope.
Or it's posted on that day, you can watch it or listen to it?
Yep, that's the beautiful thing, like I mentioned with Michelle earlier. you do an interview and at first you don't get the desired feedback, it could be 5 months down the road. Once it's on the internet, it's on the internet for good. So basically, once it's on the internet for good, someone can find it like 5, 6 months later, heck, even a year later. So it's kind of like a legacy conversation piece in a way. Something to keep in your permanent highlight reel. I could.
You mentioned monetizing. Since most of us here are not authors or not yet authors, but maybe have some other skill set like coaching or whatever.
Right.
How do you monetize this?
Yes, so since I'm an author, I mention my book at the intro of every episode, so that way folks actually go and check it out. Also, I'm in a partnership with a company where she's basically her own media and book publishing company. And the new author she brings on, she basically sends me $25 every time I interview them and they go live. So that one just came really just out of the consistency piece and perception is reality. Because right now my show has 20,000 plus cumulative downloads all over, and the average episode has at least a good 83 listens so far, at least 83 downloads. 83 people actually downloaded and listened to the podcast, and some are more than others. So for that perspective, a lot of folks nowadays, the best route for monetizing is to use your podcast as like a coffee chat with someone else to try to get closer to them if you're trying to connect with someone from an interview standpoint, in terms of probably making them a client or just getting that proof out there like, hey, this person's doing this as a way to market yourself, because the podcast is a way for me to not only market myself and my books, but also other folks as well. Yeah.
So you're hoping eventually your guests will pay you for the time they spend on your podcast?
No, they already paid with their time. And I believe Jay had a question.
So how do you recommend, or how do you go about becoming a better interviewer? How would a public speaker develop that new skill set?
Listening is always key. Listening is always key. And I admit, sometimes folks may drone on because they go into this esoteric zone and then they sort of dad joke to bring them back to reality. But Elizabeth can attest to that. It's not
I wasn't
necessary.
droning, but they were bad jokes.
She wasn't droning, her just really bad jokes. And plus we get along easily. But yeah, for that, listening is always key. Listening and then looking for ways to possibly insert. And also, kind of like what I mentioned earlier with the Word document and the past research, if the guest has enough back information, I can just go off of that sheet. They may be entered in there, and heck, even listening to key parts as well and asking them follow-up questions to that. And also listening to other podcasters, because even though I'm one-man wrecking crew, I do listen to other podcasters and learn from them. Because even though I was listening to Top 10 Self-Help, I know very darn well that there's other folks out there who have bigger followings than me that are probably doing something that I'm not doing that I can learn from. So that's how I go about getting better. Seeing others do it, listening to others do it, and then making sure I listen and give the full attention to the guest as well, and not be on my smartphone or going into another tab on the computer, because there is a difference if you make sure you keep your focus on the person being right there and fully aware. Woo, another question.
Have you had a podcast where you're here in person and it's like somewhere else, like a WebEx or something like that, you did a podcast like that?
Oh yeah, I had to do that because I interviewed a guy out in Australia
Oh, wow.
and another lady who was traveling out in Oman. So that's basically online for someone else. But like in person, one-on-one, I'm laughing because I didn't have the equipment at the time, and this was the early episodes. But I interviewed someone, and we interviewed each other in a coffee shop. And I didn't have a working mic because the podcasting equipment I got in the kit didn't work. The mic was trash, and I'm like, all right, we're not doing this with that. So we just recorded with my smartphone. The content was still good. I mean, the quality wasn't the best, but we still got it done. So there has been moments like those. Question? I know you got one, man. You had your hand up.
You kind of answered it, but it's two questions, kind of, especially since I'm getting ready to start my own podcast as well. So when you, like, let's say you're going to interview someone here or Barack Obama. So when you interview this person, how do you go about the exact time to do it, length of it, and the person you're interviewing, they have to have Zoom too, or like how do you go about like you interviewing them with Zoom, but they may not have a Zoom, so like how does that work?
The beauty about Zoom is the fact that you don't have to install it. There's a dial-in number, you can just dial in the number, it gets emailed to them automatically. And I have a scheduling system called Calendly, and I absolutely love it. I love it. Very little hiccups, next to no hiccups with that one, because this podcast is kind of like part of my side hustle. I set up business hours for it, after work or before work, whether it's like Monday, Thursday morning, or Monday, Thursday night, because there's folks out in California, maybe 9:45 for me, but 6:45 for them. Or if it's like the guy in Australia, he's 12 hours ahead of me, so it's afternoon, 12 p.m. Tuesday, while it's 11 p.m. Monday night here. And that's really what I do for it, have a scheduling link, so that way folks can see what dates are available. They can choose a date, enter their name, their email, their phone number. That way they get text reminders about it. And that's another thing too about Calendly in the beginning. One thing to note if you go this route is that you have this 30-day trial, and it works very well. And then if you try then it's not going to work out, because one guest went ghost on me. Completely ghost on Memorial Day weekend. It was on a Saturday afternoon too, and it was California time, 3 p.m. for her. I'm like, all right. And it was all because she didn't get the text reminder. I gave her a call, shared an email, and did social media, just went completely ghost. So even though it's a great system, you'll actually have some of those moments if you go the interview-based route, where folks will just ghost on you and never return a call or anything. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
For that instance,
Oh, yes, question.
just a quick question. For that instance, when she went ghost on you, did you just use a backup to replace that time, to fill in that time?
And that goes back to the point about having a backup, or at least a backlog of interview recordings. Because the beauty of being on that list, I got interview requests like at least a good 5 a day. Half of them I said no, because I don't want to talk about politics on this podcast. We get enough of that with not even wanting to be around it. And I had it, and funny enough, it was a 3-month wait time last summer. So it was all good with me. It was all good with me. Don't worry, it's not that long of a wait anymore. I cured that one. Yes, Elizabeth.
When you were talking about having what we'll call business hours
Yes.
for your podcasting, and thank you for referring others for me to talk on their podcast. The challenge is that their hours are normally during the day and I have a real job.
Yeah.
Are those hours like negotiable? Can I say, hey, whoever the guy who sent me, can you maybe talk to me on a Saturday afternoon even though you're not available via your calendar? Is it negotiable?
With me, yes.
Well, I know.
Yeah, with me, yes, and some others it can be. I mean, with some others, it can be. I mean, there's this principle in a book called Hustle and Grow Rich, everything is negotiable. So, it's negotiable.
So I just have to reach back out and say, hey, can you talk to me on some other time and day?
It's like, yeah, we can try again. Oh, yeah, I noticed a couple other hands that went up. Oh, okay. Kathy, I've heard from you all.
Do you recommend or have you ever sent some of the interview questions ahead of time?
Sometimes I do. I used to do that, to be honest, and after a while, I just kind of got lazy with them. Like, they'll know what they're in for. They asked for this, so they Sometimes I'll send it ahead of time, but if they listen to 2 episodes, they'll know the flow and everything else. And funny enough, like sometimes I'll send the question at a time and they don't even acknowledge that they got them. That's actually one of the reasons why sometimes I don't even send the question beforehand, because they'll feel like, so, I didn't check my email today. You sent questions? Oh, okay. I ain't get
And then this is more of a comment and also a question.
Yes.
For those in the room that have my Toastmasters hat on, you may or may not know that you now can see all the projects within Pathways
Yes.
in your path. For those that have certain paths, there's an elective for creating your podcast. And I want to ask you, have you seen that, and can you comment on it if you've seen it, or?
I've seen it on Frank's story. I've taken the assessment. I haven't given icebreaking pathways. Because I'm still on the legacy system and I want to cash in all that before June 2020. But I am getting my DTM next month, so. Yeah, so, no. And I think Jay had his hand up first.
Sure. And this is another way of asking to define what is a podcast. But the way I'm going to phrase this question is, at what point does an audio recording that's on your hard drive now technically become a podcast? What is the definitive reason that it's gone from just an audio recording to now being a podcast?
Okay, cool. I'll answer you with this random book here. No, it's not self-promotion intentionally. So with the book, you have the random cover, and then you have the endorsements. It's got endorsements, the interior design, and everything like that. So basically, it becomes basically a podcast when you put it onto a hosting site like Libsyn, which is listed in your workbook packet. And then when it goes out to different areas. So with a podcast, it becomes a podcast when it gets put onto, if you do the whole classic YouTube or SoundCloud route. Don't use SoundCloud, it's trash. I hate it. Because I want you to pay $15 a month for it, and most folks that follow the podcast on there now are bots. But basically it becomes a podcast once it's all edited, put together, and then live online.
So it doesn't have to be one particular definitive platform. It could be multiple platforms that's still a podcast.
Yeah, because the Going North podcast is probably 20 different places right now. Yes.
Question, do you do a video podcast, or is it just a talk podcast, or is it a combination?
It'll be a combination in the future. I just do raw audio at the moment. Some folks do video and audio to set themselves apart. So it's coming. It's coming. And I think I can handle
Yes.
this.
I have a comment about your question earlier about you sending questions. I was in a podcast recently, and the interviewer asked me to send him the questions. So it can go both ways, because they assume you're the expert, they're not, and they want to make sure that the conversation goes well, so they'll ask you, what do you want me to ask you? Now, he did that, and then went rogue and asked me other stuff.
So went rogue and lazy, okay. That's the first time I heard of that one. All right, Michelle, your
I've
question.
had that experience too, and I like getting the questions, but sometimes it's nice to be spontaneous. My question is, how do we know where the podcast goes, like how many listeners, like, you know how you advertise in the newspaper, you know, the circulation, and you know, like the listeners in a radio radius, but how do we know with the podcast, how big it is,
Yep.
or small?
So with YouTube, it's easy. You can check out the views, and then with the podcast host itself, Libsyn, which is in your workbook packet, that's the main one that a lot of podcasts use because it's been around since around 2004. And depending on the package that you choose, I pay $30 a month for all the statistics, and it shows the statistics for each and every episode. So like with one episode, it has 1,100 downloads right now. And this wasn't even a big time guest. This was a lady out in Detroit, a writer out in Detroit. And she has over 1,000 listens, and it's not only from Detroit, but listeners out all the way in Egypt, Israel, Japan, and even in Russia. So the podcasting hosting platform, it doesn't just host your MP3 files and distributes it out. It also shows you where everything is downloaded and listened to, so that way you get a track. It even, funny enough, it actually even shows like what the most popular ways folks download stuff. Like if they use a Google Chrome browser, they list that. Firefox browser, they list that. So that's usually how I'll keep track of all the stats for that.
But I mean, okay, me, the author, wants to know how many people are going to hear me on Going North.
Yep, so the average episode is around a good 82 downloads per episode. And funny enough, I learned this a couple months ago.
But how would I know that if I go on your show?
How would you know that? I could just tell you up front and even
I
shoot.
should just ask the podcast host how
Yes,
many people are gonna hear me on your podcast?
Yeah, and not to mention, it varies.
And they
like,
won't lie to us? No, I'm just kidding.
well,
I know
can't-
you won't, but I'm just saying.
I can't speak for everyone
Like,
else.
can they, yeah, so hopefully they'll be honest, but.
study or stylus, the one that gives you those statistics, have you used that?
It's in there somewhere. I
And what's
haven't
the
used it
difference,
much.
what's the difference between that and that audio that you're telling us?
Yeah, the difference between YouTube, it's its own separate hosting
They should-
platform,
they
and
only
yeah,
give you statistics for YouTube, correct?
yeah, and the thing is, another thing about YouTube and